Hey men, welcome to another Uncommon Man podcast. Today I have with us Travis, and I'm really interested in Travis's story. He's from, we'll say, the far north, up in Alaska, and he's got some pretty cool stories for us. And there's some interesting things going on in his world that I'll get him to bring some insight into. So Travis, welcome mate. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me.
It's funny mate. Every time I see your name come up, it's T million or TR million, and it just looks like trillion. Every time I see it on the email, I'm like, yeah, trillion, no, fantastic. What an email to have. That's perfect. How how are things in your world, mate?
Man, things are good. Things are crazy. Absolutely. Utility world used to be such a boring, just mundane, entity, and that is not the case anymore. And I don't foresee it's going to be that way for at least the remainder of my career, and probably for far beyond that.
It's about to, it's wild now. I imagine it's just going to get wilder for quite some time. I've got some questions for you, but can you just share some insight in the world that you're in for our listeners?
Yeah. So, for me and where I'm at right now, so like you said, I'm in Alaska. I actually reside in the second largest city in Alaska, but from a city standard, it's a large town. Fairbanks is about 50,000 residents, so fairly small from a city standpoint. But from Alaska standpoint, second largest city there is. I work for an electric cooperative, so we are an electric utility that provides electric services to about 100,000 residents within the interior of Alaska. Or if you look at a map, we're dead center in the middle of the state.
It's also the biggest one, isn't it?
We, depending on how you measure it, so we're the second largest utility in the state, largest geographically, second largest by load, second largest by our employees. So, depending on how you measure it.
I'm really interested because what does it mean to have a co-op of a company?
Yeah, so for a co-op is we don't have shareholders that we earn dividends back to, and they're stockholders of the company, like a what we call a for-profit utility would be. We are owned by our members, so we are owned by those who pay the power bills, and so we don't try to make like a return on investment of say 10 or 12% a year. We try to run as close to lean as possible to where we're as close to break even as we can be. And if we over collect from the members in a year, let's say we didn't have as many expenses as what we projected compared to what our rates were, we then will take that money, reinvest it back into the utility, poles, wires, generation plants, and then over a 25-year period of time, we will give that money back to the members in the form of a capital credit check. And so they'll get that money back. So instead of us going and borrowing from a bank, we're basically borrowing from our members on longer term investments into the organization. So typically it keeps your rates a little bit lower than what it would be if you were a for-profit entity.
I'm really interested in that because I wanna understand some thinking because you're a bit of a utility lifer, aren't you? You were a COO and a CEO before this company as well. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Cool. So was that a co-op before as well?
Yep, it was.
Is that generally is that normal? I guess. Like, is that the
Well,
general?
in Alaska, most of the electric utilities are public power or cooperative models. There are a handful of investor owns throughout the state, but I would say a vast majority of electric utilities in the state of Alaska are public power or cooperatives. In the lower 48, so the continuous United States, the 48 other states,
Yeah.
there's about 900 co-ops nationwide. And so they were originally developed to serve rural communities that weren't being served by investor-owned utilities back when in the early 20s, when investor-owned utilities started coming up and serving the larger cities like New York and Los Angeles and those areas. There were the outlining communities and farms and ranches that weren't being served, and so there was a movement in the 30s to start powering those remote areas, and that's where the co-op movement was being born in the United States, at least.
This is super interesting because what is what is the different thinking of a CEO running a company for profit? Like, hey, we've got to maximize and squeeze out as much money as we possibly can, to a co-op. What do you see as the difference in terms of the thinking? How do you guys show up in terms of a culture as well? Like, what are the big differences? Because to me, it's kind of like, wow.
I think for me personally, the biggest difference is being a co-op. I'm more focused on people-centric. How is this going to benefit my community? How is this going to benefit my team? When we look at projects and when we look at expenditures, we try to find ways to find a balance between, we could keep reliability extremely high and gold plate things like no other, but it's going to cost our members more. Or I can use duct tape and baling wire and try to cut costs, which is going to bring reliability down. So we try to find that balance in between. I think that's one of the biggest differences for me is how do we do it the right way the first time, keeping the costs as low as possible for the membership, but ensure we have long-term services for them way out in the future.
How does that relate to the culture of your company? What's it like working there?
For me, yeah. So I mean, for me, I'm always been kind of a people-centric person. I really try to they talk about servant leadership. In my opinion, I don't know if there is other types of leadership. So I try to really pour into my team, pour into my community. And so for me, I really want to, I'm not going to try to make decisions in a vacuum and just, hey, it's my way or the highway. I try to get feedback from my team. And, at times it can be hard when you got 300 team members that are spread out, over a huge geographic area. But I try to get out, into my power plants, into the field, meet with my team, and actually hear feedback from them before we get into decision making. I guess the other part of being a co-op with that is I don't have the power to make all the decisions. I've got a board of directors. I've got 7 directors that are elected by the membership that are the fiduciary of the organization as well. So they approve the budgets. They have the ability to hire and fire the CEO. We do annual performance evaluations, but all large decisions, ultimately, I've got to bring that to the board to get the final approval on that to go forward. So just an extra step in the process. Much like a for-profit would have like an operational board, I've got more of an advisory board.
Okay, and this leads me to, this is one of the things you chatted about when we first met, which made me think in a way, because in my mind right now, I'm comparing just small businesses operating, construction companies. They're all for profit. Everybody that I've generally worked for, like we run a not-for-profit as the School for Men, but generally the men we work for all have profit-first companies. It's interesting because that's when they think about business. It's like, why do we have business? We have business to make money. That's kind of the number one rule of a business, is like you get into it to make money. But when we spoke, and this is, I think, it's a generalization, but many people have this image in their head, me included, is that the CEO of these companies, they're very isolated. They're in that vacuum. They're pedestaled almost. They're untouchable. They're unreachable. And I loved it, and I want to know if I'm correct here. Do you have Power Up with Travis? Is that what you talk about when you talk about your community sort of get-togethers?
Can you restate that one more time?
There was something I was researching on you, and it said that you bring your community together, and there was almost these something you branded around Q&As with Power Up with Travis. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. My PR team's fantastic. They come up with those names, not me. That's for sure.
That's fantastic. So, can you give me an idea what a Power Up with Travis looks like?
Yeah, really what it is for me, it's a way for me to get out into the community and make myself accessible. Not every community member is going to call and try to make an appointment with me or come into the office. They're not all going to be, down at the legislature where I may be at during session or anything like that. So For me, it's we pick a location that's a central location, whether it's a coffee shop, a local pizza place. We've held them at libraries before, and it's I'm there for hour and a half, 2 hours, just a open Q&A, just discussion, just a round table, kind of like a town hall type of thing. I typically don't come prepared with a presentation. I don't come with any slides. It's just, let's sit down, have a cup of coffee, and have a discussion. And so that's, and I did this similar type of thing when I was at the last co-op. It was a little easier there because I only had, I think, 4,000 meters. There was only 6,000 people total between two major communities that we served. So you kind of knew everybody. I'd been there for quite a few years as well. Here it's a little different when there's 100,000 people that you're serving, to be able to have that one-on-one connection with them. And so it's an attempt to get out there and make myself accessible, because that's not necessarily always been the case previous to me being the CEO of this company, or in other companies within the community. They're just really, that accessibility is hard to come by at times.
I've got an interesting question, and it may be a little bit kind of left field, but what you're sharing is a lot of insight into the model that we share with our men around masculine and feminine energies, around how are you open to all things, so not being right all the time, but still give direction in your relationship still, because generally, I look at a company, when you're sitting up high, and hopefully you are, because you want to see the vision of the company, you often see, well, almost always, you see more than what everybody else sees. You see 12 steps ahead, they might see one step ahead. They see, oh, what have I got to get done today? You're like, okay, cool. How are we going to get this thing in 12 years into the new energy, into these sorts of things? And you're sharing such an amazing example of receiving and being open to feedback, and then going, okay, cool, we're going on this, based on that and my knowledge, we're going on this direction. How do you feel, and how long did it take you, if it was just natural right from the start, to go from a place of, I know best because I have the experience, I've done this as my degree, I've done all these things, like, we're going this way anyway, I don't care what you say, to a place where you're like, oh, that's a really valid point, that's changed my mind, I'm really open to not being right all the time? Was there a transition in your life, or were you always just open to being, I guess, proved wrong in a lot of ways, just open to everybody's ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't really reflected back too much on that particular thing, but as I'm thinking through it, there were times probably in my early career where, I prided myself on being right, and this is the right direction, and this is the way to go. And, I have always tried to learn in every opportunity I get, learn from every leader I've ever had. And I've worked for some really, really phenomenal leaders, to where I learned quickly that, how to trust your team and how to give, enough autonomy to team members to be successful. And I've also worked for those who were just the opposite, that were micromanagers, and it was their way or the highway. And I would say, just through my career and different leaders that I worked for, I've kind of picked and choose things that sat well for me as an employee, and things that have sat not so well with me as an employee, and said, how can I replicate the things that I received really well and project that back onto my team? And so back to that is, having a leader that was like, I literally had a leader at one point, his favorite saying is, he would have his executive team around him, and he would be asking for input. But then he would always caveat it with, well, just to remind you, my vote is worth one more than the sum of all your guys' combined. So really what he was saying was, you could say whatever you want, I've already made my decision, and I'm not going to change my mind. And as a team member under him, it was like, well, why am I even presenting my option? Where I've had others that, hey, I want to hear collaboratively what everybody's thinking, because I'm in the mindset of, I may have some answers, but I'm not going to have as good an answer as a bigger group of people. And there may be pieces out of it that I pull and say, ooh, that is the direction I still want to go, but I want to also implement this or that to make a better outcome than just if I were to do it myself.
Okay, so that leads me to, have you had a scenario where you've got these, yeah, I mean, they're more powerful than employees by a long way in a co-op. That's how my mind's kind of understanding it, because it's in a way it's their company as well. You're the chosen leader to help them go. Have you ever had a stage where the people's voice is, we really want this, but you know that is just not the way to go and it's going to ruin things, and you've had to make an executive call? How have you dealt with that if you've had that opportunity before?
Yeah, I've had to do that a few times, and that's the I guess opportunity and the pressure at times as a CEO you have to make. And for me, it was explaining to them, hey, look, I understand this is the direction you want to go. Here's why I'm choosing to go this way. And what I've always tried to do is at least, let them be heard. And a lot of times they just want to know that, hey, at least I was heard. I gave my opinion on this. Yeah, you've got the ultimate decision to make, and you're going to make whatever decision you need to. But I try to always say, hey, I value your input. This is why I'm going a different direction. And this is kind of the justification why. I don't feel I necessarily always have to give a justification, but for me, I always appreciated that whenever I had a leader that would say, hey, I value your input, but I'm totally going a different direction. And here's kind of the basis of it. So that's, there has been many times where I've had to make a decision that was counter from what, either the rest of my team or an individual had said. And like I've told them before, this may not be the right decision, but guess what? We can always change and make a different decision later down the road to correct. But this is the direction I feel we need to go and why.
You've touched on the biggest thing that we work with our men on, especially in their relationships. They're worried about pissing off one person, which is their wife. You've got 100,000 that it's like, oh crikey, this could go really south. And the interesting part is that they're so worried about getting it wrong, often they'll never make a decision. And at the end of the day, their partners feel exhausted by the continual, like, oh, well, I have to keep making the decisions. What's for dinner? Where are we going? How the kid? And he's just sitting back and afraid to get it wrong for one person. But I loved it how you're open to feedback, and it sounds like, and help me and the listeners understand, you've broken away from the identity of you and the outcome. You aren't involved in the outcome. You believe what is best, but if this outcome is good or bad, it doesn't mean that you're good or bad. It's just the outcome that it was. And I really want to dig into that because it sounds like there's a really healthy disconnect of identity to result. And is that on purpose? Is that something you've really gone through and experienced yourself? And if so, how did you break that? Because so many men are attached to, well, if my wife's in a good mood with me, then I'm okay. If my business is making money, then I'm a good person. And that's their identity for so long. We're talking guys who are doing hundreds of thousands to hundreds of millions. Their identity is attached to that one thing. So I'm interested in your sort of insight to there and where that might have changed for you in your life.
Yeah, and for me, it's a little strange too as I'm reflecting back on it, because growing up, I was always uber competitive. I was in multiple different sports. Everything was all about winning. My dad growing up, it was there would be the teams that were like, hey, as long as you're having fun, it's great. He was like, no, it's all about winning. And so instilled early into my life was, you've got to win at everything you do. And I'm not really sure, and it may have been under one of the good leaders that I had, to where, he really kind of instilled the autonomy in me to, originally when I was working with him, I would say, okay, here's the problem I found, here's my recommended solutions, are you good with that? And really try to get that, him to say, yes, go forth on this. And finally, after a little while, he sat me down and he goes, look, I hired you for a certain job. I expect you to know this better than anybody else. to make the decision on which is the best decision to get this accomplished, and then to share with me what the outcome was. And so he said, I don't want to get involved with the decision-making process. I want you to do that and to just report back to me, hey, this is the problem I found, this is the solution I had, and this is how we executed it to fix it. And I think early on with that, a couple times, I made the wrong decision and something did fail. And for him, he was like, okay, well, did you learn from it? And how do we go about improving the next time around? And so I think probably about that time was where it kind of disconnected from me to where I can fail and still get better because of that failure, as opposed to failing and going, oh, I'm a failure as a person because that didn't go quite right. I mean, I learned pretty early on that, at that particular time I was, my background was in electrical engineering and I was working with PhD plasma physicists. I will never, ever know everything there is to know about any one thing. And so I think that was really humbling for me too, to go, yeah, I can talk to these guys. They don't know anything about what I do, just like I don't know anything about what they do. So for me to assume that I'm going to get everything right when those guys couldn't even make the right decision on something I'm doing because they don't know my world, I think kind of instilled in me pretty quick to go, just because I got something wrong or I failed on something isn't a reflection just on me. It's just about what I happen to know at this particular time.
Okay, so I have an important question here, and this is a lie for so many of our guys. They are worried that when life gets to that, when business gets to the point, when I am no longer identified with the results, what will happen to my drive? What will happen to my hunger? So what happened to you when, I use the example of, if I'm not winning, I'm a loser. That's the whole, like, you've got to win, right? Yeah, because if you lose, well, you're a loser, and that makes you a bad person or not a good person. And so we develop this massive hunger for winning. I've got to win, I've got to win, I've got to win, because I'm getting chased by this scary lion. That means if I lose, my dad doesn't love me, or whatever the things are. When you came to that point of it was okay to fail, it was okay to learn, did you still have the hunger to continually grow and improve? And how?
I think so. I don't know. I think for me that, sometime in my, mid-career, I think there was kind of a switch, and I'm not sure exactly what it was, but probably around that same time frame that I was explaining earlier, is I really started shifting from winning to how can I continuously improve myself. And so at that same time, I kept looking into what are additional classes I could take. Where am I not as strong as I may want to be in a certain area, whether it's financing, or whether it's in engineering and technical, whether it's in leadership and managerial. And I would find classes or books or something like that to continuously improve myself. And for me, I think it went from always having to win to how can I get better tomorrow than compared to today, or next year versus this year. And for me, I just started really nerding out on, how to improve myself from a leader standpoint than anything else. And, I don't know, the way I kind of look at it now is, what can I do to better my team and better the company? And like I've told the team, one of the goals we have right now is to improve our, basically our relationship with our members, our member owners. Our member satisfaction rating wasn't all that good when I got here, and what I told the team is, I said, well, that's the end result of something we're trying to do. I go, but that's not where our focus needs to be. Our focus needs to be internally, and we need to focus on building our team to be a very cohesive, well-operating team. That alone will start bleeding out into the community and will take care of itself. And so, for me, it's like, okay, I'm not focusing on the external as much, so I'm going to lose in that area. No, let me go focus on this area where I know we're going to build up and win, and ultimately that'll take care of the score on the other end. And so, I don't know, there was some sort of a mind shift that went from, just a project or just a task, whether I won or lose, versus playing the end game. Like, what's it look like further down the road to move the needle?
Yeah, it's really interesting. lots of men I speak to who have got to that point in life have had either a breaking point where everything's been torn from them, and so their life has collapsed, and so the attachment gets dissolved from an external pressure, or they've had, I might say, an awakening. They've had a spiritual experience. Some men have had a heart attack, or they've met a crisis in their life that has broken down all these aspects of themselves, and they've finally surrendered a part over to, people say, the universe, God, or just surrendered themselves and being like, right, well, that's no longer me, and I'm heading there. It sounds like, have you had mentors and experience, or is this just slowly evolved over time? It's been a gradual growth.
I would say it's evolved over time. I mean, I've always been pretty well rooted in my religion. As a Christian, I've always relied on God. My wife has always been strong in that as well. I mean, we've been married 22 years now, and I think it's just in a progressive, me leaning into my religion and learning that more and more as I go. The support I have from my wife and my kids have just grown over the years. So I don't think there's been like a snapping point to where, oh, okay, I need to change things. I think it's been just a natural growth over time. I mean, there's obviously been times through my career where it's like, things aren't going as well as I would expect them to, or, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right field? Should I be changing? Yeah, those kind of things happen for sure. I mean, nothing has been, just the golden brick road to where I'm just walking down the path and falling into these positions. A lot of it's been very intentional to get to where I'm at today. But yeah, so I don't think there's been one major life event that has kind of switched anything.
Where did you go when you had those questions? Let's say challenges. The forks in the road. Like, what am I doing with my life? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Because you've shared that you've got a Christian faith, which I think just faith in general, or a belief in something higher than ourselves, is something that we're missing greatly. When I work with men, we're very eye focused, and we try and carry all that weight. And I'm like, your shoulders just aren't big enough, mate. Like, you don't have that capacity. Where did you go in the past when you met those forks in the road? Was it your religion? Was it your wife? Was it men groups? What did you do?
It was kind of a combination, depending on the season of my life and where I was at. I mean, there were times where, yeah, I leaned very heavily on my wife, on kind of her thoughts and advice, leaned pretty heavy into my religion. There have been times where I've had really close men group that I could, share some of this information with and get ideas bounced off of. The last major career decision, I actually have a mentor that's also a leadership development guy a consultant I've been using for the last 6 years or so. And, when I was presented the opportunity to move to this utility I'm at now, of course, my wife was early on in the discussion with me when the first ask was brought to my attention going, hey, have you ever considered this? Went to her first, we prayed on it a bunch, and then I reached out to this mentor who was doing, leadership develop with me at the other utility. And I was like,
Yeah, okay.
hey, here's an opportunity that just came up. I want to run this by you. Like, I'm just weighing the pros and cons of this. And, for him, he was just asking questions. He didn't give like a, hey, you need to do this and why. It was like, well, what about this? Have you looked at this? What about this? And, ultimately got me to a decision. So there's been multiple aspects as I got into different things where we leaned into that. And I would say, for me personally, what I've learned with my marriage is anytime my wife says, hey, I've got a feeling good or bad about something, I tune into that. The very first opportunity I had to go from the company where I had that phenomenal leader, I was an engineer working on, power generation facilities and distribution facilities. An opportunity came up to come to this utility, the first one that I was at. And I told my wife, I was like, they offered me a job to come over to work for them. And she goes, well, what'd you tell them? I said, that I'm not really interested. I'm pretty happy where I'm at right now, and kind of blew them off. And she goes, okay. And a couple days later, she circles back with me and goes, you know, just some pros and cons with this. The job that we have right now, it's under a government contract, and we don't know year to year whether we truly have a job or not. We've got a baby on the way. This other job would be more stability. The other job would have potential growth opportunities. You'd still be doing everything you love, blah, blah, blah. And 3 weeks later, we switched jobs and we're going over to the other place. So for me, I learned really quickly, like, that was a really good move. And looking back at it, the former place I used to work at, you know, it changed hands. The government got rid of the facility. It changed hands to another organization. Then it changed hands again to university. And so she was wise beyond my measure that I could ever have. So I learned early on, like, if she says something, I really lean into it.
You're sharing so many amazing things here, and I want to bring them to the surface for the men. One is that you had created in your relationship a safe place where your wife, your beloved, could come to you and tell you the exact opposite of what you thought. She felt like you think you've probably had a wonderful relationship, 20 something years of marriage. It's normal for you. But what men often don't see is that in their relationship, every time their partner brings something up, you know, they get heated or they get defensive because it's almost alerting them that they've made the wrong choice, or they feel, again, if I'm not winning, I'm losing. And my wife's pointing out that I'm not winning, so she's pointing out that I'm a loser. And they get angry or aggressive or just abrasive. And that's such a beautiful thing that your wife can comfortably come to you and go, this, and this. And not only has she done that, she's actually come to you and communicated in your logical language, in the way you see the world. She sold it to you and been like, and she would have done this naturally, just being the intuitive, beautiful woman that she is. It's just like, this is how Travis would receive this the best. I'll give it to him in the logic ways and weigh up the pros and cons for him. And that's just magic. It's magic. And for the men listening, we call her the Oracle. And it doesn't, I use your co-op as an example. She may bring this to your awareness, like your co-op brings it to your awareness, and you go, okay, thank you very much. That's really lovely to receive. And I'm going in this direction. And that's it doesn't mean you would have made that choice or you might have made the wrong choice, but the lesson learned. And what an amazing relationship to have created, and what a cool lesson for the men listening as well. That's just beautiful. Man, awesome. Thanks, Travis. And
couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see other men experience it, because I think it's one of the most beautiful things that we have in this world. And I think it's one of the rifts that has been created between the whole matriarch, patriarch, and just women and men in general. We've each got these beautiful gifts, and I think women have been driven to be like, well, I've got to be more like the men. I've got to, that's what's valued in the world. Logical thinking, making money, doing their thing. So they're pushed to that. Otherwise, they're not valued, not realizing that their gifts as the oracle are just so potent and so amazing. But we've lost our value in that for a lot of people. They don't seek counsel from their partners of what we don't see. I often ask my wife Fleur, I'll say, what is it that I'm not seeing? And she'll be like, I'm not sure about that guy, or my feelings are off about this. And she may not be able to explain her feelings at the time, but I'm like, that's enough for me. That's cool. Okay, I'm going to go this way. And 9 times out of 10, it's a pretty good decision. I've made some other decisions and gone against it. Be like, that was pretty dumb. Okay, I'll go make this one. But yeah, it's such a beautiful world. I want to understand, because I know things are moving fast in the world, especially in your world, especially with energy, technology. You're kind of at the pinnacle of, what happens as we get closer and closer to, well, you would say almost free energy. Like, how do we get to a world? What would happen to the world with free energy? I mean, you'd collapse powers and all sorts of things, but that creates a sort of mergence of technology, of AI, of efficiency, of green energy, of the old energy, of you've got so many variables in your world. How's that showing up for you and your co-op? And I guess, how's it testing you as a leader as well?
Yeah, it's, like you said, it is moving at rapid pace right now. And we're really at the crux of that through pretty much every decision we're making right now going forward and the evaluations we have. So, we spent a couple years really looking at, okay, could we implement additional wind resources within our service territory? And we already, for perspective, we already have the largest wind farm in the state of Alaska. Granted, it's not all that big; it's only 25 megawatts. But we peak at about 225 megawatts on our system, so that's about 10%, from a peak to peak standpoint. But the entire grid in Alaska is kind of laughable if you really want to think about it. We joke that we're almost a third world country when it comes to electrical infrastructure in the state. So there's over 700 miles of transmission that goes from one point in the south of Anchorage in the town of Homer, goes up through Anchorage, up through Palmer and Wasilla, and then ultimately up to us in Fairbanks. And so it's about 700 miles long, and there's one line. And the capacity is pretty low on it. The entire peak of the entire rail belt's only 750 megawatts. And so that's smaller than some cities, large cities. So anytime we're looking at trying to, get out there and implement renewables or other types of generation, our system is so fragile, it does not take much movement, whether it's in load or generation on one side of the system to affect the other side of the system. So we have to be, I would say, overly cautious and overly engineer things than what you would, like if you were in the lower 48. You could throw a few hundred megawatts of wind on the system and it wouldn't even show up as noise, where we throw 10 megawatts and it could fluctuate the system. So we've been really evaluating what more wind would look like. We found that there are limitations on our system. So now we're working on, okay, how do we engineer solutions to that? I think the biggest challenge we have right now is we're seeing large industrial growth on our system, a lot of gold mines. We've got 2 major gold mines on our system. We serve 5 military installations within our service territory as well. We're seeing growth in that area where we're not seeing it as much on the residential side. But the problem is when you're looking at wind or looking at solar, for us, our peak is in the winter for heating loads and things like that, where most of those generation sources work really well in the summer, not as much in the winter. And so I have to have the ability to push a button to start a generation plant and come online and be online when it's 50 below zero. And that is the big challenge we're having, is how can we move toward a greener, more renewable type portfolio, but also have the reliability when it's needed in the middle of the winter. And that's been really our big challenge that we've been dealing with. So we're still fighting through some of that a little bit more. The other part too is there's a lot of projects that potentially could be out there, but they're way too big for us. They're billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars that is beyond our ability to build, and they're more statewide projects. So we're really having to lean on the state or the legislature to pass proper legislation in order to get some of these projects going that could be the solution for us, but we really don't have a whole heck of a lot of control to move that. So that's kind of the push and pull struggle that we're dealing with right now, is how do we keep the reliability up and high in the middle of the winter? How do we also bring on more renewables and reduce the carbon output that we have on our system? But how do we also do that working with the state that has to actually come forward to build some of these big projects?
And what sort of technology is at the edge at the moment? Like, is there micronuclear? What's happening with AI bringing into that space as well? Like, what's very fringe for you guys?
Right now, the micronuclear front is huge. I've been personally working and evaluating that front for the last 5 years or so. And I would say right now it is on the cusp of really moving forward. There's a number of different manufacturers that are actually going critical with their technology, meaning they're actually up and live in national test labs right now, advancing and testing out their technology. But unfortunately, it's still.
When we say micro, how big are we talking? Are we talking house size? Are we talking farm size? Container size?
So some of the, I guess to put it in perspective, like some of the micronuclear plants that I've evaluated and looked at could be anywhere from 5 to say 70 megawatts in size, and they'll take up about 5 acres of space. A lot of that is just clear area around, but it may be just, a few like train connexes or shipping connexes in size. So they're fairly small and compact, but anywhere from 5 to 75 megawatts. There's other ones that are I've looked at that are about 300 megawatts. But so those are getting closer, but there's still none deployed. And so until you get that first one that's commercially deployed, how much risk are you willing to take? Again, going back to this is our members' money, not our money or our shareholders' money. How much risk do you put out on that? So we're kind of watching it really closely. We're doing the needed evaluation to say, okay, could this work on our system, and then be ready to make a decision when it becomes available. But again, that's a few years out. So again, that's looking at end game. I was discussing with my staff the other day. There's the micronuclear technology. There's a potential big hydro project in the state that's being looked at. There's a gas pipeline that's being looked at. There's a few big things. And just reflecting back on, before any of those actually were to become available and online, I'd be right at the cusp of getting ready to retire. Like, they're just recognizing that I may be investing my time and energy into a project that I will never see come to fruition while I'm employed here still.
So almost legacy. I'm interested because do you see it becoming more global, more of a conglomerate, or do you feel like energy is becoming more decentralized and micro and stuff? You got 700 miles of coast of cable. Does that cable become pretty much useless, and you have a little micro station here and a little micro station here, and people become decentralized in their energy?
The way our system is, in a way a lot of Alaska is there's a ton of microgrids throughout the entire system. But what you find is when you start really getting into the cost aspect of it, economies of scale will really drive the cost down. So I think from the grid in Alaska standpoint, having a more centralized, what we call generation and transmission system, will be the ultimate driver to bring costs down. I still think there's going to be a need for distributed generation and microgrids, but it may be more from a resiliency standpoint than it is from a cost beneficial standpoint.
Awesome. Well, Travis, I can't thank you enough for your time. Some of the lessons that you've shared today that are just so potent and alive for our men. Is there any advice that you've received from your mentors or anything you've experienced in your life that has just been a gem for you that you'd love to share with our guys?
Yeah, for me, I think the thing that really sits with me is, and one of my employees said it the other day, and it really hit home, was, nobody really cares how much you know until they really know how much you care. And so I found that just me pouring into other people and trying to make them better at the end of the day bolsters me up and helps me to succeed. Little tiny things that I think is routine because I've been doing them so long. I still get so much feedback from individuals going, oh my gosh, this really hit home to me or whatnot. So one of the things I do for my team is I pick a book out every single year, and on their birthday, I highlight some sections out of the book, I write a personalized note in the book, and on their birthday, I give them a copy of the book. And I can tell you, it's a little bit more of a challenge with 300 team members to make sure to get them all out and distributed and whatnot that way. But I pick a book, the first one, and I do this all strategically. The first book I hit on the very first year I was a CEO here was The Ideal Team Player, and or 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so I really want to say, this is what I'm trying to build as my groundwork of this organization. And I really want to build a cohesive team. This year, I used a book that's really focusing on mental health and mental awareness and mental wellness, and really hits on that aspect of it. And the timing of it was that we just went through the coldest, darkest winter on record in Fairbanks, and there was a lot of depression and things like that. I didn't know that when I picked the book out. That was just something that went in line. So a lot of people were just like, wow, this really hit home. This really makes a lot of sense to me. So I try to find, little things like that to just give back to the team as much as I can. And in turns, they're going to have your back, and they're going to make sure you succeed.
Honestly, a man of service. It makes sense that a man of the church, man of the cloth, a man of service. That's a beautiful thing to share. Thanks for that, Travis. That's really cool. Hey, thank you so much for your time. I'm beyond appreciative of this and really excited to share it with our guys as well. Those are just such gems. And oh, it's funny. I just put up a post last night in our school for men, and one of the things, 20 something years ago, I started planning the life I wanted. And the thing that kind of came to me was, if I help enough people with their dreams, then that will help me achieve mine. And that was kind of always my thing. I was like, surely that's a great way to work. And it's been such a wonderful life to be in that service, and it's so wonderful to meet you and see that you're in that with such a massive scale across a whole co-op, and really interesting to understand how that works, how that's changed as a leader, how you lead a giant family, because that is huge. That takes a lot of, that takes an ability to be disliked as well, which I think is healthy, because you're not 100,000 people, they're not all going to like you. And to be okay with that, that's a really healthy thing in life, because as a leader, you have to make decisions that a lot of people aren't going to like. And you hope that it's a small fraction compared to the larger fraction that are happier with it. But it's a lot to carry at the same time. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and sharing your experiences. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Hey, it was absolutely my honor, and I am just blessed to be able to spend some time with you, Josh.
Thanks, Travis. Thank you.